The Wholeness Network. Awaken to the reality of wholeness.
Today we're going to be talking about what causes anger and what makes a person angry.
It might not be what you think.
Right.
So stick around. We're going to go through the physical reactions the body has to anger. We're going to discuss how it affects us.
And how anger can be used for good.
True.
As we think about anger, the first time I heard that anger was a secondary emotion, I didn't believe it because I felt like anger was my response sometimes.
It was right there.
Yeah, it was right there. There was no time for a first and second.
Right. So true.
But the truth is, anger is a secondary emotion. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we feel sad, we feel hurt, we feel left out, we feel threatened, we feel afraid. Mm-hmm. There is some other emotion that we feel first. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that emotion makes us in some way feel insignificant or out of control in that situation. Or maybe so vulnerable we don't want to be in that state we perceive as weak. Mm-hmm. And so we get angry, and that anger makes us feel significant and in control.
Yeah.
And so to recognize, first of all, that what's causing your anger is something else. Mm-hmm. That's a great place to begin. What is it that's making you feel upset? And if you can figure that out, you're on your way to understanding how to help curb your anger.
And processing it.
Yeah.
So looking up like the root word of anger or that idea, I thought it was fascinating that anger being meant to excite to wrath, and it was actually used, so it was used as like to anger someone almost a whole century before it became having a hostile attitude.
Oh, wow.
So what came first was the idea of angering someone, and then it became, now I'm angered, and it became personal and internal,
that's
where in the beginning it wasn't that way. So I thought that was interesting. And also, speaking about secondary emotion, the Middle English used anger alongside words of like grief and pain, trouble and affliction, vexation, sorrow, and wrath. So those were the synonyms of that time. And so they understood the secondary emotion, anger.
For sure.
So even from the beginnings, it's been something that's deeper than just that fieriness we have inside. In fact, as we were talking, that's what it is to me. There's a fire to anger. And sometimes that fire is important.
Right.
Sometimes that fire is needed. It is an emotion. Therefore, it's a human reaction, and we don't get rid of it, but we use it for good.
Right. And so if we think about those responses in the body, like what actually happens when you feel angry, how do you feel?
Yeah.
I want to know if you feel the same thing I feel. For me, I feel like my blood is boiling.
Yeah.
Like I literally feel like...
Yeah. Which is why we call it, we're getting heated.
Oh, yeah.
We literally are getting heated. It is this hotness in the body.
Yes.
And there's something, when you're feeling out of control or whatever, then there is some kind of a boost of energy it gives you to be able to move forward. And so it is something that can be to our benefit if we use it for good.
It's like a surge of energy, like my fist automatically clenches. Not that I've ever hit anyone, but
it's a
you feel that. There's a tension, there's an energy, there's... Maybe we don't need to describe anger. Maybe you've all felt it.
But think about like the breathing pattern. What would be a breathing pattern of the emotion anger? I mean, it's, you know what it is? It's almost no breathing.
Yeah. You're not thinking about breath.
Yeah, you're actually holding your breath,
yeah,
I think.
I think so too.
And so one of the things that's helpful is just to begin to take a deep breath, and that's one of the ways it moves and goes through you. But yeah, there is no breathing.
Yeah.
It's a holding of the breath.
Yeah.
And we talked about tensions in the body. Where do you feel those tensions? I definitely in the solar plexus.
gut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Oh, the tense part in your stomach, the anger in the belly.
Well, and that's interesting too, because that's the area of the body, the solar plexus chakra. That is where your personal power is.
Yeah.
So if that is threatened and you need to bolster that and energize that, you're going to send your energy and support to that area to motivate you.
Yeah, what a great system it is to say, all right, that's what it's meant to do. We just have to become aware. It's something we haven't been aware of.
Yeah.
So in the heart, what does the heart beat? The actual physical heart begins to beat very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a lot of those fight or flight responses.
Yeah.
Your breathing becomes more shallow, your heartbeat more rapid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. And then the eye expression. Anger is the easy. You get that crease in the middle of your forehead with the angry eyes.
We're not going to demonstrate our angry face.
No, please. No, please. I've used that enough. But definitely this face contorts into not a beautiful way. Would you agree?
My children could look at that angry face of mine and that they would obey. They would start being obedient before I even said a word.
Yeah.
They could see it in my countenance.
and the
Mom's
blood was boiling
mad.
inside. Yes. Yes, but
like
like we said earlier, anger isn't always a negative thing. It is a motivator. It's presenting itself in order for us to take action somehow. Yeah. And in that moment, do we have a choice of which way we move toward the action for good or the action that is not good? And in fact, in history, usually change has come about from these initial people being angry at the status quo or what is acceptable and saying this is no longer acceptable. So it begins with a few brave people who use maybe some of that anger to push society forward. But it's not always the best trail to stay on as we make change.
Yeah.
And I know you learned and studied a lot about those kind of in a few different history experiences with anger.
And I think for me, as I look back in history, when anger created change that was positive, that anger came from things that were core truths and values for all human beings. Mm-hmm. There should not be slavery. There should not be rape. There should not be
taking over of somebody else's possessions and
yes, there should not be injustices. And so when we respond in our anger to those things that are truth, that's when your anger can motivate you to create positive change. But your action at that point is really critical. Mm-hmm. If you look at Gandhi, for example, he was responding to something that was true. Human rights were being violated, and he needed to stand for that. But he did not stand in his anger. Mm-hmm. He let his life be his mission, and he stood in peace. Mm-hmm. And that peace rippled out and affected people so deeply that it shifted a society. Mm-hmm. So even though we might be angry and we might be correct in our anger, that next step is so important, because when we act out in our anger and do things that we regret, that's when anger can be our enemy.
And I would guess Gandhi probably had feelings and emotions of anger.
Right.
But he took that moment, and in order to plant a seed, he knew, if I plant a seed of anger, I don't want anger to grow.
Right.
So he took time in that moment to go into peace and love. And that's where it takes a minute and it takes some discipline. But if we can stop and really pay attention to what we want, then we don't stick to anger, because we will get angry back. That when somebody's angry, the natural defenses of the other person in the body is to defend.
Right, for sure.
And so we defend even if we're defending wrong, because our physiology is built that way.
Right.
To defend against anger.
Right. And I love Mother Teresa. She was such a proponent of peace and nurturing and taking care of people. But she said, if you have an anti-war rally, I'm not coming.
Yeah.
But if you have a peace rally, invite me.
Yeah.
So even though she spent her life defending the injustices and the impoverished and those people who were looked down upon and cast out, she spent her life correcting that wrong and nurturing people into that right. She would still only stand for that in a peaceful way. And I think that's an incredible example.
So great. When one thing, anger is a natural emotion. So the important part is to let the emotion come and let it flow in and present itself, but it's also, so we need to release it. And I know you have found in Reiki that you can feel anger.
Right. If someone's holding on to Reiki and I'm working with them, I can feel that anger, and it's like a cement wall. There's no going through anger, and people sometimes want to hold on to their anger and they want to heal at the same time, and you can't. Anger will not allow that. You really have to let go of the anger in order for the healing to come in and take place. The anger is a contradiction to your healing. Anger is full of hate and resentment and judgment and force, where healing, it always comes through love and compassion and peace. And so know that we can't have both. And we don't need both. Anger is not going to serve us to hold on to it. It's just like holding on to poison.
So it's important to look and use that anger to get to that first emotion, because it's the secondary emotion.
Yeah.
Use that anger to process and find that first emotion, because that's what's needing the healing.
The attention, yeah. One of the most important things that we want to do as we talk about emotions is, first of all, just to honor your feelings. And I think anger is one of those things that so often, especially as a child, we're just told, don't feel angry, don't get mad, don't do this, don't get that. And I think it's confusing, especially because there are things that are wrong that happen in the world. There are injustices.
Yes.
And so when there is injustice, I think it is natural and sometimes right to feel angry. As we talked about, that is what has motivated a lot of change in history, when there has been an injustice and it angered people enough that they moved into action. So I would say the first step, really, as you're trying to sort through your emotion and anger, is to say, I am angry, I recognize that, I feel that, but now let's look, is this anger coming from an injustice, something that truly deserves my anger, or is it coming from my ego? Because we also get mad about things that hit our sore spots and our vulnerable parts of ourselves.
Our wounds.
Yes.
Our wounds. Sometimes that's the natural reaction. We've had our own wound.
Yes.
And we get hit in that wound, and instead of cowering, where it feels helpless, we turn to anger so that we feel like we have some control, like you talked about before, over the situation. So it's time to look at which one of those is true. Where is that anger coming from?
Right. So in allowing yourself to feel and express your anger, first let's talk about when it's coming from an injustice. I remember one time I was very angry about something that had happened in my life, where in many senses of the word I was a victim of somebody else's choices that were wrong and
an injustice,
malicious in intent, and I had no control over that. And I feel that I had a right to be angry about that. And yet for me to sit and hold that anger over someone else's choices never hurts them.
Right.
That anger only hurts me. It affects me on a physical level, an emotional level, a mental level. And so I had to decide, even though I am justified to feel this anger, I'm going to choose not to hold on to it. And yet it needed expression, and I wanted to do that in a safe way. And so we live right at the base of a mountain, and so I climbed up the hill a little ways and found a pile of rocks and I threw those rocks down the mountain, and just every rock I chucked, I just sent a piece of my anger with it. I know Mother Earth forgave me for that. She's very loving that way. But that was a safe expression of how I felt. That honored me, and yet that gave me a tool to release it. Of course, there was nobody there. No one got hurt in this
Well, and
circumstance.
one time I could tell that my husband had a lot of anger, and so I grabbed some things that weren't very special, and I drove to a part of town that could handle it, and I made him break some things to express that emotion, because we talked about in the emotion video, it's got to go. It's an energy.
Yes.
It's got to go somewhere. So in throwing the rock, that energy is able to go somewhere.
Yes.
And that's helpful.
Yes.
So otherwise we stuff it down inside.
For sure.
And that's when we get health problems galore.
Yes. And even a simpler way, maybe you don't live by a mountain, but sometimes when I'm in my car and I really need to have a conversation with somebody and stand up for myself, even though I'm sitting in a car all by myself, I will yell at the top of my lungs what I want to say to them, you know? And again, it's a way to honor me and how I'm feeling, and a safe way to express it and release it, because I certainly don't want to hold on to that. And it's amazing how once you let the energy of that anger and emotion out, now there's space to look at the other possibilities.
Yes.
You know, I was mad at this one person for years, and finally we had one of those conversations in the car, well, me and myself, yelling at him. And the minute I finally got all my anger out, I realized there was another way he could have intended that sentence.
Wow.
And I felt so bad that here for 20 years I had carried that anger when possibly it wasn't even the intention, you know. And yet I would never have seen that had I not released the anger.
It's so powerful. That's such a powerful expression of that, needing to get it through. For 20 years it was stuck.
I know.
It was stuck for 20 years. We do that so often. But sometimes it comes from a place that isn't injustice.
Justified.
A lot of times it comes, again, like we talked about before, some kind of a situation comes forward, and in a blink of an eye, we start to compare. Or it hits that ego of so it makes us feel like usually we're not good enough. Or
it hits a wound that we already have.
Yeah. And so in that case, it's a very different scenario. So as we talked about earlier, tell me, if when you're with a client and they have an injustice that they have anger towards, how is it different toward the injustice to go about healing that injustice, anger from injustice?
Yeah, well, I feel like when that anger is justified, really the most helpful thing I can do for my client is help them process that anger, give it a voice, give it an expression, find some way to release it, because that anger came from a source that was not their own and was not their fault and was not their doing. And so at that point, all you can do is help them release that, so that in that more healthy state they can start taking steps toward healing. But if somebody comes and is angry over something coming from the ego, then it's a totally different process, because we've got to stop and look at why they needed that thought.
Yeah.
Why did you need to feel like you were the best? Why did you need to feel justified in that? Why did you need to feel that you were better than somebody else? You know, and you got angry because you weren't, or you got angry because they said something to make you feel inferior. Well, now let's treat the cause of the thought. Let's go to the mind.
Yeah, so I think it's Deepak says it happens in almost in an instant, where so the emotion comes in of anger, and then the mind is going to keep playing scenarios to keep that anger going and alive. But we go to the mind again and we question it, just like you did when you put it out there, and that anger, then you could question, oh wait, could that have been meant the other way? And so you begin, that's where logic can come in.
Yeah.
And we can question our thoughts.
Yes.
Like, is this justified? Okay,
Yes.
is this anger something that we can even talk about whether we need to process it with the person we're angry with, or if this is something I just need to work at on my own.
Yes.
And that takes it takes a minute of space. But first accepting it is important, so that, and becoming aware of it, and then learning to accept it, then we can decide what needs to happen next.
Yes, and I just remembered a funny example. This is a good example. There was one night where we were eating dinner, and I'm very sensitive because I am not a great cook. So let's just put that out there right now, right? And so we're sitting there eating dinner, and it was food that I had picked up somewhere and brought home to my family. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, this food just tastes so good to me tonight. It's just so good. And my husband said, well, that's because you didn't cook it. And you could see all the children, like they all froze and they stopped eating. And they're like, Dad. And in that moment, I could have gone to my ego and been so mad that he said that. But I knew what he meant, because sometimes when you cook stuff, by the time you sit down to eat it, it doesn't taste so good. It's always
better when somebody else cooks it.
And that's what he meant. And so I could laugh and say, you're right, we should eat out more often.
Yeah.
But that could have been a moment, where it went the other way.
Right. And that we do that, where it comes in and we're right there. Too fast. But but that's where the thought process probably for you happened quickly. You understood what he meant.
Fortunately.
Yeah.
Or he would have been on the couch that night.
Yeah. And it took a whole different direction.
Yeah.
But you used the logic of it. You probably, it went through, I think my husband really does love me. He doesn't normally say rude things to me. Yeah, he wouldn't say it that way. And so, you're able to bring in some logic, quick as can be, and shift that into a positive experience.
Yeah. My kids still laugh about that moment. They were traumatized.
So now let's take a moment and let's bring forth any feelings you have of anger. And at this point, they can be whether it's justified or unjustified. Just allow that anger to come forward and kind of connect with that. Take a moment to give that anger a voice. And you can say to that anger, I see you, and I know that you are there. I see that you are calling out for action. You can even imagine that anger holds a shape. And you can give it a color. And you might stop and think for a moment if that shape holds a sound or a frequency. And in that moment of being connected with it, see if it has anything to say, if that frequency has a message for you. And see if that anger wants to be something else, if the intelligence of that anger desires to transform into something else. And let any images present itself. Let your imagination help you here in seeing and honoring that emotion of anger. Allowing that anger to flow through you. Seeing if the energy of that can release from the body. Show compassion to yourself for the need for that anger. long as you need to sit with that and allow it to transform. And when you're ready, take a deep breath. Begin to feel the anger release, at least for this moment. We are so grateful to you to take time to recognize the anger that might be within you and know that it is a normal human reaction and emotion. It's something that we all deal with, and it's the process of working through it that it can help propel us forward and to have more compassion for those around us. So thank you for the work that you are doing on yourself and understanding more of who you are and more of your emotions.
Thank you for listening. Join the community of knowledge and growth at thewholenessnetwork.com.